From Canadian Food Focus, this is Ask a Farmer. I'm your host, Clinton Monchuk, a Saskatchewan farmer. In this podcast, we talk to food experts to answer your questions about your food. So today on the podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit more about how to spot nutritional misinformation. And I think we've been inundated with a lot of different information on social media, different things we read, whether it's new diet trends, new superfoods, new things to make yourself into a superhuman self. And really, there's a lot of fluff around that. And what it is in our minds, we kind of get skeptical about some of this stuff. Some of it's actually legit, some of it's not, but it's hard to decipher what is and is not true. So, to try and get a better handle on this, today we have Erin MacGregor with us. Erin, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you, Clinton.
Awesome. So we feel you are the expert of this information and trying to decipher what is true and what is not. And we kind of want to draw on your expertise for all our listeners out there so they can get a better sense of how they can make more informed decisions about their food. But before we get into that, we want to know more about you.
My name's Erin MacGregor, and I work primarily as a dietitian. That's my professional designation, and I've done a lot of different things as a dietitian. I still wear a lot of different hats under that role. I work as a clinician in a hospital setting and have done that for about 15 years. So looking after people's nutrition care who are either having trouble eating or can't eat in a normal way in hospital. But I've also done lots of other really interesting things on the side as well. So for a long period of time, I was running a nutrition communications business with a partner where we wrote a cooking and recipe blog for Canadians, which, encouraged people to get back into the kitchen and cook with their families, but mostly it encouraged people to relax about their food. And whether that means, shopping for it, preparing it, cooking it, feeding their children, we really wanted people to recognize what an amazing time it is to be alive when it comes to accessing incredible variety and affordable food in Canada, and to make choices around food based on facts rather than fear, which you alluded to in your introduction. Lots of folks in Canada have lots of different sources of information around food these days, and it can be really difficult to kind of tease out what's true, what isn't true, what's an exaggeration around food. And so some of the other work I do is really talking about misinformation and helping both consumers, people that work in different industries, dietitians, learn how to recognize misinformation and how to combat it if they're using social media or other tools to share their information. So I guess that's the short and long of it. But I mean, I'm on a podcast that focuses on agriculture, and I should probably tell that side of my story because typically dietitians, we don't get any meaningful training in agriculture when we come up through our programming and write our exam as dietitians. And so when I started working as one about 15 years ago, I'd never grown up in an area that had a lot of agriculture. I lived in an urban space most of my life. And so I didn't have a lot of context around agriculture, but as a consumer-facing food professional, I was getting a lot of questions related to how our food was grown, what was safe, just basic questions for you, Clinton, but more complex for someone that doesn't have any kind of meaningful experience in agriculture. And I found that the resources that I started to go to first were more like pop culture resources. I was finding a lot of my information online. I was finding a lot of my information through what I like to now call shockumentaries, but the farming and food documentaries that scared you about, big agriculture and GMOs and that kind of thing were really popular about, 10, 15 years ago. And so I was getting most of my information from there. And unfortunately, passing that sort of misinformation on to consumers from that space. And, at the end of the day, it's my job to, sift through information and try to bring evidence to consumers and patients and clients and whoever I'm working with. But I failed at doing that in the agriculture space because I was a victim to the misinformation myself. And, around that time, I think that the agriculture industry really started to recognize that misinformation was a huge problem. I think that a big part of it is that consumers and farmers have never been more disconnected. There are way fewer people that work in the ag space these days, and the direct connection to consumers can be really difficult. And so I found myself as kind of an intermediary. And the ag industry started seeing that and started seeing dietitians and other types of food and media influencers being this kind of consumer facing person, and started developing things like farm tours, so that dietitians could get, direct experience seeing what Canadian farming and agriculture was all about. And my first tours were through Farm and Food Care. There was a Ontario-based organization that did one-day tours for people who worked in food and media. And as a food blogger, I got an invite onto one of these tours, and it really opened my eyes. And like I got the bug, and I wanted to learn more and became really curious about where our food came from. And it's been 10 years. I've been on dozens of farm tours throughout Canada and the US, tours of biotechnology facilities to learn about, genetics and modern agriculture techniques. And now I use my voice as more of an advocate for Canadian agriculture and helping people to understand where their food comes from through, again, facts and not fear. And that's kind of my MO, is trying to dispel misinformation, particularly in the ag space. I have a real passion for it, and helping consumers just really enjoy eating. And so, it's important to bring awareness to the average consumer, how much work, what a huge industry agriculture is here in Canada, how advanced it is from a tech perspective as well, which is something that generally consumers are really unaware of at this point. I recently went on a tour in Guelph to some of the biotechnology facilities that are coming up with new pest control measures and different types of seeds, and just the level of detail that we get down to when trying to, create new techniques in agriculture, grow things different ways, using GPS, using algorithms. AI is on the forefront for sure. This is all happening in Canadian agriculture across the country. And, it's not old MacDonald that's hand hoeing in the field anymore,
I always say when I tell kids when I go to talk to them about farming that, have you picked weeds in the back garden of your parents' place? Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, so could you imagine picking weeds in 4,000 football fields? Oh, no, no, that would take forever. I said,
Pass.
yeah, no, that's a heavy pass. Yeah, that's why we have different technologies now to do it. So,
Yeah, it's pretty
but
cool.
you're right. Like there's all this new information that's coming out, um, even on the agriculture side. For me as a farmer, to try and get my head around some of it and what we can use and implement on our farms and what's coming down the pike in the future, to
Yeah.
try and make sure we're ready for it. And it really is this. It's kind of like that treadmill, that technological treadmill that just keeps on going. And there's lots of stuff out there. We just have to decipher, what we're going to use, what's useful, and maybe pass on some of the other things. But
Yeah. Just like any industry, right?
so, Erin, you wrote an article on Canadian Food Focus talking about how to spot misinformation when it comes to nutrition. And one of the things that you actually brought up right at the start is there's an infodemic.
Yeah.
Do you want to just talk about that and some of the different methods that you have, just to spot some of this misinformation, what we can do about it?
For sure. Yeah. So an infodemic really relates to kind of this avalanche, I would call it, of information that can be both accurate and inaccurate that we really have to navigate kind of on a daily basis. And usually it's online. And that large volume of information can make it really difficult to extract what's actually true and what's relevant to the topic at hand. And so I think that there's no doubt that we're living through an infodemic right now as it relates to many, many topics, agriculture being one of them, nutrition being one of them. And so being able to spot misinformation tactics is a really good way to kind of weave our way through this infodemic. And now, in terms of spotting misinformation tactics, the point is really to spot the tactics. So it's really, at this point in time, it's impossible to have consumers understand or have in-depth knowledge about any one particular topic enough so that they would be able to weed through all of the misinformation online and understand what's true and accurate, right? So you're never going to have a consumer who's never had any kind of meaningful experience in agriculture learn enough to be experienced enough to pull out what is misinformation and what isn't. Same with nutrition. It takes many, many years to have some expertise in nutrition. I'm a dietitian and I don't consider myself an expert. I have some expertise in some areas. So it's not about actually knowing a topic intimately and understanding a topic. That's not the best way to pull out misinformation. It's really learning what the tactics are. And at the end of the day, this is kind of a higher level. It's more of media literacy than it is actually understanding the topic itself. And so there are a few ways to become more media literate and to spot misinformation without having in-depth knowledge about a topic.
You already made comment to the fact that you've been doing this for so many years, and you still feel that there's so much more to learn, right? And
Yeah.
I feel the same way in agriculture, right? The problem ends up being, and I did actually do a little bit of research on it to find out what the psychological term is. So it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where
Oh, yeah.
you know a little bit of information, but now you have a platform to tell the world, right? Like you just want
Right.
to tell everybody about this new information, and you don't
Right.
really actually understand whether or not it's true or not. So you
Right.
have this platform now with social media and the internet to do this. Um, but we all know that as soon as you start to get little tidbits of more information, that well, it's actually quite a bit deeper. So
Right.
when the average consumer sees some of this stuff that comes on their social media, and we were talking about it before. So if somebody's looking at nutritional information, I would
Yep.
only assume that there's a ton of information that gets populated in their feeds about this. So, how can the average person kind of say, okay, like that, that's interesting, but I
Right.
don't know if that's true,
Yeah.
right?
So I think it's really teaching people how to be skeptical and to use critical thinking as their first line of defense rather than understanding the topic itself. And there's a few ways that you can kind of go through the few steps to apply your critical thinking skills with topics that you might be skeptical about. And in terms of nutrition information, one of the red flags that I look for is to watch out for claims that aren't backed by a source, for instance. So, like as a science communicator, and I would consider yourself that too, you communicate the science about agriculture and what are the facts about agriculture on a regular basis. We can provide evidence for the claims that we're making. So if a journalist or a writer or a social media creator is, making a claim about nutrition or health, they should be able to provide evidence to support those claims too. And so, online platforms make it very easy to share information about sourcing. So if it's an article, you can look for hot links within the article or at the end of an article. Information posted in the caption of a social media post can link you directly to a scientific paper or a well-known or trusted website. So, more trusted websites end in .gov, .edu, which is an educational institute, or .org, which means it's a nonprofit. So those are tiny little things that you can look for. And the other thing is adequate evidence is really important when you come across content that presents something that's new, so new or novel information that you've never heard before, or something that goes against the current consensus or the scientific consensus, right? So if you hear someone denying that, climate change is human made, for instance, well, the scientific consensus is that, like 80% of climate scientists believe that humans cause at least some of climate change. You would have to provide a lot of evidence to counter a scientific consensus. And the same goes for nutrition. So I can give you an example, for instance. Let's say someone on social media, a creator, comes out and says that a strictly carnivore diet is something that's healthy. So eating only animal products, not eating any vegetables or grains is the way to be healthy. Well, that creator would be refuting literally decades of scientific consensus about the benefits of a high fiber, plant forward diet. And since it's really, really rare, that one study reverses a really long held scientific consensus, this type of claim should really present evidence from multiple high quality sources. And if you don't see that happening, it doesn't necessarily mean that the claim is false, but it is a way for you to stick a tiny little red flag in it and to heighten your level of skepticism about that particular piece of content. So that's really kind of the number one thing that I look for is sourcing.
What about the emotional factor, right? So
Yeah,
we are and I see a lot of it, right? Where it's just high strung individuals saying, if you eat this, you're going to have the super best body in the world and you're going to look like me. And then pumps his muscles and, ooh, wow,
for
I
sure.
wish I had
Yeah.
muscles like that, right? But like,
Yeah,
how do you counter a little bit of that? Because we know that's out
yeah,
there, right?
for
So your
sure.
mind automatically goes into, yeah, I like that. I want that.
Yeah, totally. So that is one way to appeal to someone's emotion is in a positive way, right? Is to tell someone, if you buy this, eat this, do this, your life will become better. But I find that it's much, much worse when the appeal is for to a negative emotion. So I always say that if a post makes you feel angry or if it makes you feel scared, then you should be skeptical and you should be wary, and that should be an automatic red flag for you. Creators know that a strong emotion can really impair your ability to think critically and to process information. Um, when you react to something emotionally that you see online, just pause for a brief moment and reflect on the content itself, right? So, nutrition research is notoriously oversimplified in news. Um, and it often instills fear as kind of a form of clickbait. So, for instance, I'll give you an example.
Yep.
It can be a headline that you see on social media, on like an online media source that says just one serving of, insert literally any food here, can increase your cancer risk. And this is almost certainly misleading when compared to the actual research it's referencing to. There's really no such food that, causes any one thing. So anytime you see a headline that says this one food causes cancer or may cause cancer, stick a red flag in that as well and be skeptical of it because that's just not how nutrition research works. Nutrition science is extremely complex. And in reality, it's almost never, ever unilaterally like going to glorify or vilify any one specific food or nutrient. And if you see that happening in a headline, then it's important to be skeptical of that. Fear-based messaging is also a really, really common tactic that's being used in social media currently. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the grocery store bro kind of content that
Now,
you'll see often on TikTok and Instagram. So it will be some kind of social media wellness influencer that walks up and down the grocery aisles and picks out foods that you shouldn't eat based on really scary ingredients that, this ingredient's also found in a yoga
uh,
mat. We've heard that
yeah,
with the Subway debate
okay,
recently,
yeah.
right? So pointing out foods or ingredients that are dangerous or toxic. That kind of content has become really popular. And creators can really benefit from these claims in a lot of different ways. So fear-based messaging draws a lot of followers. It's really compelling content. But it also may be helping to market that creator's products or services, right?
Right.
I'm going to scare you about this toxic thing or this dangerous thing. And here, come to my website where I sell the supplements or the
Yeah.
services to solve your problem that you're
Yeah.
scared of,
Yeah.
right?
It's
So,
interesting. Sorry, I was just gonna say, and I don't know if you've seen that video, but the traveling dietitian, right, talking about eggs, right? So I'm an egg farmer, right? We produce eggs on our farm, and depending on the study and what was released in the media, right, like eggs are good, eggs are bad, eggs are good, eggs are bad.
yeah,
But
eggs are a
but
great
then
example
over the course of time, I think now we've realized that it's part of a balanced diet, right? For a
for
good
sure.
animal protein, if you want to use it, great. But you go back in time and it was like you were vilified for consuming it, and then it was a health food, and then it was vilified, and I know what you mean, and this is the emotional kind of thing that happens with us, right? We get on these
That's
different
right.
things as opposed to slow and steady diet, right? Something that hits all those food groups, and you can be happy and not nervous or highly emotional
Totally.
about it, right? So,
That's right. Focus on variety and enjoying what you eat. Those are
yeah.
two of the most important things about, having a healthful diet.
Okay, so the third kind of area in the article that you talk about is trying to be more aware of common nutritional misinformation tactics, and what are
Yep.
some of these that our listeners can kind of just place in their minds when they are going grocery shopping?
Yeah, so this is more of a group of misinformation tactics that are called logical fallacies. And a logical fallacy is really something that is a deceptive or a false argument, but it actually seems like a really strong argument because it appeals to us psychologically. It's very psychologically persuasive. So, the first example I'll use is a really, really common one in the nutrition space, and that's called the appeal to nature fallacy. And this is an argument that assumes that something is good, quote unquote good, as long as it occurs or exists naturally. So natural is better. Synthetic or unnatural is bad. It's not moral. It's unsafe. It's dangerous. That kind of categorizes, the good and bad in terms of natural and unnatural. And it's really common in spreading misinformation about food and nutrition. But it's what I think is really important to remember is that there's lots of synthetic ingredients that have made our food supply safer, like preservatives,
Yeah,
and more nutritious, like vitamin and mineral fortification and enrichment in some of our foods.
right.
And naturally occurring things that we find in our foods, like bacteria, like listeria, for instance, that can be deadly. And so the bottom line here is if someone is making a claim that something is better or good or safer because it's natural, that doesn't make it's not an adequate claim. Natural does not make things safer. It does not make things better. It definitely does not make things more nutritious.
Yeah.
So that's one of the logical fallacies. It's very psychologically persuasive.
Sometimes we fail to realize that there's a lot of things that want to kill us out there in nature, right?
Yeah,
like
it's
and
true.
and and failure to understand that, kind of brings in that some of these misconceptions. But anyway, so
That's
sorry,
right.
go ahead. Yeah,
Lightning strikes are natural. Bears
yeah,
are natural. These
yeah,
things can kill you.
yeah. Yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, so the next logical fallacy, it's called a false dichotomy. So this is really a tactic that presents an argument as either black or white, when in reality, like nutrition science in particular, is really a ton of shades of gray in between. And so being wary of foods, of claims that say a single food or nutrient is good or bad, right? And if you see something being categorized into black and white, it's something that you should be wary of. Unless it's in reference to a food allergy, food should never be categorized in kind of this polarizing way. So that's another tiny little red flag as well. The next is also a really common one, a very common logical fallacy in the nutrition world, and it's the correlation does not equal causation effect. And so this is a tactic which really mistakenly argues that when things are observed together, that they're correlated or one causes the other. So a really great easy example to think of is when the rooster crows in the morning, does it cause the sun to rise or are they just observed together? Right? So they are
Right.
correlated, they're observed together, but the rooster is not causing the sun to rise. Yeah, so when claims are made about an increased intake of a specific food or a nutrient causing a health problem, it's really important to be skeptical of this type of relationship. Causal relationships between nutrition and health are extremely difficult to prove, and they require a significant amount of good statistical analysis to make a strong argument. So it's always important to stick a little red flag in that one as well.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of three of the larger logical fallacies. There's lots of them. If you were to Google logical fallacies, there's, dozens of different ways that the human mind wants to take a shortcut and that arguments can be really psychologically persuasive. And it's important to understand the fallacies themselves, these little type of false arguments, rather than the information. Because once you see one of these false arguments, you can be skeptical of a piece of information, whether or not you have a lot of knowledge or information about that specific topic.
It's great information, not only on the nutritional side, I think for a lot of our different aspects
Yeah,
of our life. And you mentioned before, the infodemic is not just about nutrition, it's
right.
so many other things in our life that we're inundated with now. This kind of
Yeah.
leads us to the fun farm fact. I think some of the listeners might not realize this, but did you know that honeybee colony populations in Canada have been on a steadily increasing rate from 2012 until 2021? The low and bee populations occurred in 2013, in which there were about 667,000 honeybee colonies, to a high in 2021 when there were over 810,000 honeybee colony populations. And this is from Statistics Canada and the
Hmm.
Canadian Honey Council. Because we've seen different either advertisements or things on the media saying that bee populations on the decline, and I don't want to discredit. There are certain species of bees that are endangered in different parts of Canada and North America that need to be saved. But when you look at the stats for the honeybee populations, that's the vast majority that are pollinating our fruit trees, our my canola and mustard or
Hmm.
flax, right? Like these just awesome pollinators that are helping our crops. They're actually on the increase, not on the decrease, and I think that's a good news story. But I don't believe a lot of consumers know that, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, sharing information about a drastically declining bee population is pretty compelling content to share. And when there is free reign to share information without having the onus to share sources or evidence of that, that type of information is going to spread a lot faster. And there's really good research to support this. There was a study done, I think it was out of MIT, in 2012 that looked at 100,000 tweets, some with true information, some with false information, and how they got traction on Twitter. And I'm going to mess up the exact numbers here, but essentially, false information travels 6 times faster than true information. It gets spread, it gets retweeted 70% more often than true information. And it spreads deeper and longer Twitter chains as well. And I mean, false information is pretty compelling. If as a consumer or someone looking through social media, and you see this really fearful fact about declining bee populations, you're going to want to retweet that more than something like, well, there's been a gradual increase in bee populations over time,
Right.
because that type
Yeah.
of fearful information is going to get more traction for you, right? And people really
Right.
just want to be in the know. They want to be sharing new and novel and scary information because it feels good psychologically to be someone in the
Yeah.
know and sharing something that could be compelling, right?
Yeah. It
Yeah,
also feeds to your emotional side too, right?
that's
Like
right.
that's whoa, hey, what's going on here, right? I need to tell the world. So
That's right. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So again, so like pointing out the tactics used, right? Well, this is obviously an appeal to emotion. This is the tactic that's being used to spread this information, and this is why it's compelling, because this is how the human brain works. Is an important piece to share with people trying to dispel misinformation. The tactics around how it's being done and not the information itself. I'm not going to combat that, but bees are declining attack with actual numbers like you just did. Those aren't at my fingertips.
right.
So I'm looking for the tactics of misinformation and not the true information itself. I just can't be expected to be a bee expert on top of, you know, the
Everything
very
else.
small niche of nutrition that I feel like I have some expertise in.
We have a better like understanding now of how to spot some of this misinformation and just how to think a little bit more critically about things when some of this stuff comes at us online. Now I'm in the grocery store. Okay. So I'm in the
Hmm.
grocery store. I'm going through the aisles and it is just like an advertising haven, right? I'm seeing all
Yeah.
these different things coming at me, picking the different labels out, trying to read them. How do I make sense of some of that? As a
Yeah.
consumer, some of the stuff on label, and I can always go to the backside, right, and look at the nutritional facts and kind of compare foods that way. But what are some of the ways that we can kind of use some of that common sense approach to buying our food so we don't get sucked into some of these different tactics that are possibly being used out there?
Yeah. So I think it's important to consider packaging as a piece of content too. It's meant to market a food as well. So you have some pieces on a package that are regulated, like the nutrition facts table, the ingredient lists, and all marketing claims really are regulated in some way. None of them are supposed to be deceiving. But at the end of the day, my advice is, unless you're looking for something very specific in a food, for instance, if you have celiac disease and you need to find something that is gluten-free, you need to look for a gluten-free certification, for instance. Ignore the marketing labels on food. We have in Canada one of the best regulatory systems in the world. Countries all over the world look up to Canada's regulatory system, and all of the food that you can purchase at the grocery store is going to be safe for you. Enjoy a variety of foods, eat what you enjoy eating. Those are my top 2 tips to grocery shopping. And really just to consider the package as a marketing tool, and to be skeptical of all of the claims that are being made there in the same way that you would be skeptical of social media content in the ways that we just kind of reviewed. So just ignore most of it unless you need a specific piece of information. That's my advice.
Sometimes we just need to relax a little bit and focus on, those key food groups, making sure we're buying nutritional food and making sure, we have healthy diets to support our bodies, right? But I love your approach. I love the approach because it just takes a lot of that fear and anxiety out of food.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. Look at the history of food and what we've had access to from a global perspective in human history, and there's never been a better time to be alive. And I think it's okay to celebrate what we have now as a win. And sometimes we just need to celebrate those, good news stories, as you say, and human progress is pretty amazing. Is it perfect? No. Do we still have room to improve? For sure. Is it pretty dang good compared to all of human history? Yes, as well.
Yeah.
Right? So just soak it in. Enjoy what you eat.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. This is good information that we can all take to the grocery store, and we appreciate the expertise on this, Erin. Thank you for being part of the podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to our Ask a Farmer podcast. We at Canadian Food Focus value the input from our listeners and ask that you share this podcast with your friends and family. Remember, this is a two-way street, so we seek your input for future segments that are of interest to you about food and farming. To do this, please click on the Ask Us icon at the top of our website, canadianfoodfocus.org. While you're there, feel free to follow our numerous social media links and sign up for our newsletter. This segment was produced and edited by Angela Larson, research and writing by Dorothy Long and Penny Eaton, music by Andy Elson. I'm your host, Clinton Monchuk, and from all of us here at Canadian Food Focus, we wish you good health and great eats.